Welcome to this screencast focusing on the Western Front as well as the technologies that were important in the stalemate on the Western Front. So, just as a review, the Western Front was created because the German forces swept through Belgium and were trying to reach Paris at the beginning of the war. Here's Paris right here, and the German soldiers came through Belgium on their way to Paris. Because Russia mobilized faster than the Germans expected, the Germans had to send some troops back across their country to fight the Russians in the east. That, combined with the Battle of the Marne, and here's the Marne right here, the Battle of Marne was when the French finally broke through and had a victory and pushed the Germans back, and so the Germans started to retreat, and then winter set in, and so both sides dug trenches along this line. And these battle lines remain pretty much the same. They might have moved a mile or two in either direction for the 4 years of the war. But they dug in trenches, and what we're going to learn about now is why trench warfare was so brutal and how technology increased the chances that the trench warfare would continue as a stalemate. So first of all, trench warfare, simply defined, is a form of war in which opposing armies fight one another from trenches or ditches that they've dug into the battlefield. A quote that was famous at the time was, "The men slept in mud, washed in mud, and dreamed in mud." Life in the trenches was brutal. When it rained, it got wet and mucky. There were rats that swarmed through the trenches and would eat anything that they could find, including corpses of dead soldiers. Food was very difficult to find, and fresh food was pretty much non-existent. And it was nearly impossible to sleep, not only because of the cramped quarters and because of the rain and muck, but also because of the enemy shells and bombs that would be going off throughout the entire night and day. Here are a few other images, and as you can see here, these are gas masks that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. To fend off a poison gas attack. And right over here, this is what was known as trench foot. As you can see, this poor soldier had to have some toes amputated. Trench foot is created when you have boots that are in mud 24 hours a day, and you don't take your boots off, and your feet just stick in the muck and the wet, and eventually they get infected. Incredibly painful, as you can imagine. One other term that's important to know about trench warfare is the term no man's land. No man's land is the land in between the trenches, and many times the leaders of an army unit would yell at the soldiers, "Over the top!" And when they say over the top, everybody in the trench had to get out of their trench, run across no man's land, and try to attack the enemy's trench. As you can imagine, it's a lot easier to defend a trench than it is to attack one, and that's why there was a stalemate on the Western Front, because neither side could successfully attack the other side's trench, and so they kept trying, and more people died as they did. Now we're going to look at some of the technology that changed warfare and caused the stalemate on the Western Front. The problem really with World War I was that the generals and the military leaders used the same strategies that they had used for hundreds of years, but the technology had changed. And so a strategy that might work against an enemy who could fire one shot at a time didn't work very well for an enemy who, for instance, had an automatic machine gun. So the automatic machine gun was incredibly important. It's a mountain gun. It fires a continuous stream of bullets. As you can see in this picture here, this one is on a wheel. Sometimes they were on an ammunition belt or something like that. But an army could have just one or two gunners on maybe 100 or 200 yard stretch of trenches, and they could mow down any soldiers that were attacking. Even if hundreds of them were coming, they could shoot hundreds of bullets to kill all of them. And so that was one of the reasons why there was a stalemate. The tank was actually a reason that you might think that they could end the stalemate, because the tank, which is an armored vehicle that travels on a track, could go across no man's land, and the steel frame of the tank would protect the soldiers from enemy bullets. So the tanks were an invention that might have ended the stalemate, but there was a really new technology, and they often got stuck in no man's land, and there really weren't enough of them to make a huge impact on the war. Barbed wire, not a very high-tech weapon, but still incredibly important. So a barbed wire is a steel wire that has barbs on it, or little sticky points, and they were put in front of the trenches to slow attacking soldiers. As you can see in this picture, this soldier's standing on a piece of wood climbing over it, but they would take that away so that when the enemies tried to attack, they would have to try to crawl through this spiky mess of steel. So they're very difficult to penetrate. Kind of a low-tech way to defend yourself, but again, these weren't used in previous wars, and the barbed wire was actually very important in creating the stalemate. And then finally, first the invention of poison gas and then the gas mask were important technologies in the war. So poison gas is defined as a gas that might cause choking or blinding or skin blisters. They would put them in canisters and then throw them or shoot them somehow at the enemy line, and when they hit the ground they would explode and create a dust cloud that looks kind of like this. And it was very effective at killing a lot of people until gas masks were invented, and then every soldier would have a gas mask, and that would lessen the impact. But still, imagine trying to run through no man's land with a gas mask on, and the fog of the gas everywhere, and then you also have to fight against a machine gunner who's also protected by barbed wire. Nearly impossible to make any advance. And so these technologies really changed the war, and they were really, really important in terms of creating a stalemate on the Western Front.